Afternoon and good evening, and welcome to the Nest on Clubhouse. My name is Jim Chu in San Francisco, California, and I'm the CEO of Untapped Global. Our goal at Untapped is to connect international investors with entrepreneurs in frontier markets, including those in Africa and Asia. We host monthly discussions on Clubhouse about entrepreneurship and investing, and also once a month, we host pitch sessions with startups and investors from around the world. You can find out more and follow us at Untapped Global on Twitter and LinkedIn, and you can join our WhatsApp community by going to untapped-global.com and clicking on Engage. So today we have the pleasure of hearing from two panelists from East Africa and from West Africa on the topic of regulation and in particular bans in various parts of Africa and how it impacts the economy, in particular for investors and entrepreneurs focused on Africa like us. We'll hear their views, and in the second half of the hour, we'll open the conversation to the audience for questions as well as your experience and insights on the topic. And finally, I should note that this conversation is being live streamed and recorded. So if you have friends who'd like to join the discussion and are not on Clubhouse for some reason, they can find us on LinkedIn under Untapped Global and listen in to comment via the LinkedIn event or the YouTube chat box. We'll try our best to bring relevant comments and questions we see into the chat. And if you miss it, you can find this chat and past discussions on our podcast at anchor.fm/untappedglobal. All right, so let's get started. So first, to our panelists, Samira and Oliomi. Samira, would you like to get started with an intro?
Oh, gosh, yeah.
Well, I can start with Oliomi if you like, either way.
If he'd like to start first, he's welcome to.
Oliomi, would you like to start with an intro?
No, let's have Samira go first.
Wow, wonderful.
Great.
Well, I can't say no to that. Okay, so just to introduce myself, I am a journalist and an analyst focusing on East Africa, but with an eye on the wider continent. I'm currently in London, and I'm very grateful to be here and to be asked to be a part of this, because I think right now, well, not right now, but just over the last few years, we have seen such an increase in African governments kind of cracking down on the internet and on social media. I mean, just now, you know, in Eswatini, you're seeing the internet's been blocked as there are protests, pro-democracy protests taking place. And I think that as much as from the outside, you know, there is this thing of, oh, you know, they've blocked the internet because there's an election in whatever country, or there are protests kicking off. The impact is a lot bigger than just on that day or just for the period of time that it is blocked, and it goes far beyond freedom of expression, freedom of speech. I think that there really needs to be an acknowledgement of just how much an internet block or the blocking of platforms, be it Twitter or Facebook, has on individual lives, on businesses, and on the way in which people outside of any given country then look at that particular country. And I guess, you know, with Oluyomi here, I think a prime example is Nigeria and the recent Twitter ban. And I'd love to hear actually a little bit more, considering West Africa doesn't tend to fall into my remit on what the impact is there.
Well, it's good that we have people from both sides, East and West Africa, involved in the discussion. That's good, and you know, I think you make a really good point, Samir, about we often talk about the political implications of a Twitter ban or shutting down the internet, but of course, the economic impact can be tremendous, not only on general economic activity, but also for investors and entrepreneurs in particular. So definitely want to delve into that a little bit further today. Thank you very much, and thank you for joining the discussion.
Thank you.
Over to you, Oluyomi.
Okay. Hi, everyone. My name is Oluyomi. I'm CEO and co-founder of Printivo. We're an online printing company. So basically, we merge e-commerce with print and creative services. I live in Lagos, Nigeria. And so if you see me on Twitter, you should know that I'm using VPN. Twitter is banned in Nigeria as of today. And this is just one of several other, regulatory actions and bans from the government that we've seen in recent months. So, and to be honest, this has been there has been a lot of negative effect on businesses, both big and small, especially internet businesses and technology businesses. People wonder why would it put a ban on Twitter affect your business? Like Samira said, it goes beyond free speech and freedom and democracy and whatnot. When your customers are using VPN, it becomes practically impossible for you to target them efficiently, even across other platforms, because that person that is on your website that you're looking at through Google Analytics and saying, oh, maybe this customer is in the US, is probably in Lagos. And when you do, then targeting becomes extremely difficult, even on Instagram, on Facebook, on any other platform, because almost everyone now uses VPN. And so it goes a long way in affecting how you can scale in terms of customer acquisition, even outside Twitter. And most importantly, investor engagement, which we're going to talk about later. It practically reduces the level of confidence that investors have in countries like Nigeria, and I mean Africa as a whole. I mean, when you think about it and you ask yourself that the government can wake up one day and just pull out a new regulatory information, and the next thing is it becomes extremely difficult to do business in Africa. We've been down this road before. We are here again, but I'm willing to share more about my personal experiences, that of other entrepreneurs on ground, and how we're trying to navigate it, and what government should focus on as against what's currently happening.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much for joining. And to Samira's suggestion, I think we should just jump right into a topic that you just mentioned, Oluyomi, which is the ban on Twitter in Nigeria. Wow, there's so much to talk about. So I'll let you just go right in there. You already mentioned a little bit, Oluyomi, about how it's affected your business, but you also alluded to the fact that this has happened before, and the cycle is repeating itself. So what happened last time, and what was the long-term impact, and what do you think will happen from this current Twitter ban longer term? And that's a question directed at Oluyomi.
Yes. Okay. Yeah. Thank you very much, Jim. So when I said this has happened before, I wasn't referring particularly to the Twitter ban, but basically regulatory actions that I would say were unforeseen. Last year, Lagos State decided to place a ban on motorcycles, and that practically sent businesses like Max and Opay out of the mass transportation business in Lagos, which is the biggest city in Nigeria. Wiped out an entire supply chain, wiped out an entire business sector. And over a year later, we're still here, and the ban hasn't been lifted. And if you look at the effect of that on businesses alone, and then you then bring that knowledge into what is currently happening with Twitter. It's been over a month that the ban has been in place. And there is no law to back it up. It's just government waking up one day and say, you know what, we're going to ban Twitter. And you take the learnings of what you've experienced from the ban on Okada, which is the word for motorcycle in Lagos. I tell people that I think we are here for a very long run in terms of this ban. It's been over a month and it has been lifted. And what we're currently seeing is that it's affecting businesses negatively, but the government really doesn't really care about that, which was the same experience that we had with the ban on Okadas and motorcycles in Lagos over a year ago.
So what was the motivation for the Okada ban, and what's the motivation for Twitter now? I know it's speculation, but what's going on?
I mean, for most of us, we all know there are speculations here and there. When it was the Okada ban was basically for security reasons, which was what the government told us. And the Twitter ban also, the government practically said it's for security reasons, that people were using Twitter to attack the government and things like that. I mean, when you think about it, these bans are in place and security situations haven't changed. I think this is the point where the government needs to like pull a U-turn and say, you know what, it's not working. We need to leave these bans. But again, as entrepreneurs, when these things happen, you try to fight, you realize that you can't fight it. You said, you know what, we're going to keep building our business despite these bans, these regulatory actions, and the rest. Yeah.
So I'm curious, so from your side, Samira, because you also you're in East Africa and also look at the continent broadly. Mm-hmm. Do the actions of the Nigerian government reflect that of many of the other governments across the continent?
I think it's the motivation is always very much the same. Mm-hmm. I think that ultimately what it really comes down to is wanting a sense of control, and how they choose to do that tends to vary. But I do think that, you know, they're all reading from the same book. It's just the way that it's executed and the reasons behind which they claim to be behind their decisions just vary. But there is very much a need for control. There's a fear. There's wanting to limit the populace in terms of how much they can express themselves. And there's very little care or consideration given to how that spills over beyond, oh, we just can't sit on Twitter and express our views.
So I hear it's really much about power and maintaining power.
Absolutely.
And maintaining control. Okay.
Absolutely.
And so in Kenya and specifically, what do you see as, or what's the closest thing that the Kenyan government has done to actions similar to those in Nigeria?
I think Kenya, in comparison, is actually pretty free. In my opinion, a better example would probably be Uganda right now, where
right,
you had an election earlier in the year, and obviously there were shutdowns during that. And then, you know, Facebook, they just, President Museveni was like, we're not having Facebook here. That's it. Simple as that. You cannot access Facebook in Uganda unless you're using a VPN. And, you know, again, not to get too political, but it seems like a very personal thing, as was the case in Nigeria. There seems to be these platforms are targeting somehow the government or the ruling party, and so that is the pushback. This was as much about punishing people as it is about punishing those particular companies.
Right, that's interesting. So, you know, Uganda is, I think, undergoing quite a bit of a lockdown right now overall. Mm-hmm. And I can imagine how, especially with the additional clampdowns on the internet and other features, that things are quite stifled and quite difficult to get done, even in Uganda.
Yeah.
Think about the economic impact.
Mm-hmm. If you look right now, you know, Ugandans on Twitter, for example, a lot of them are tweeting about the impact of the lockdown on businesses, and also, you know, things like slow internet speed. And ultimately, I think, you know, we cannot separate the fact that a lot of businesses, a lot of startups, a lot of small businesses in particular, depend upon social media to promote their products, to promote their services. And so in blocking a whole platform like Facebook, you are taking away essentially an advertising tool for these businesses. And absolutely, already in a circumstance where a lockdown means that they are limited in the amount of customers they're going to be getting and how much they, to what extent they can operate due to curfews, etc.
As a relevant anecdote for investors, there was an article in Tech Cabal. Razak Ahmed, the CEO of Cowrywise, mentioned that they received a direct message from Sahil Lavanya, a tech entrepreneur and angel investor from Silicon Valley. He learned about the savings and wealth management startup, which is Cowrywise, and then wanted to invest. So he reached out via Twitter, and 2 days later, Cowrywise closed a $3 million pre-seed round. So there's a power of Twitter after that announcement. So I think from a global investing and startup fundraising perspective, it has a big impact because we can't always fly into Lagos, and things such as Twitter and forums, digital forums, tend to be the only way that we can connect across borders. So I think this has a potentially big impact on investing throughout the continent.
Mm-hmm.
I'd love to hear any comments from you, Oluyomi, about that. Has aside from looking for customers and so on, but has it helped you connect with investors?
As a matter of fact, I have a very personal story about that. So when we founded Printavo in 2014, randomly we got a DM from a company and said, "Hey, we are at Livo, we are a private equity company, and we saw your company on Twitter." And this was 2014. We saw your company on Twitter. We saw customers' reviews, and we think it's a company we want to speak with. Can you? This is our email. Please introduce us to the CEO of the company. And that week, I had my first meeting with the fund, and they were like, "Oh, we thought you guys are like at the point where you're going to raise Series C or Series D. We don't do early stage, but we do have people within our network who can do early stage investment." They did an introduction that day, and 6 months later, we raised our first seed round from the fund they introduced us to. Now, this was 2014, and this was all from Twitter. And that was the first check we got as a company.
That's great.
So when you think about it, shutting down a platform like Twitter is like hurting an entire generation of not just founders, but companies, young people, and the rest from global opportunity. Now, doing that at a time when the unemployment rate is over 30%, inflation rate is over 23%, and we're all trying to survive a pandemic, you begin to wonder, what then is the goal of the government? Right? I strongly believe that the real goal of the government is to create wealth and open opportunities for the people, as against doing otherwise. But what we've seen, what we've constantly seen over the past couple of months says otherwise. I've walked into rooms where you're pitching to investors outside Nigeria, and the first question they ask is, if the government wakes up tomorrow in your country, which we've seen before, and passes a regulation that shuts down your company, what would you do? Now think about it. You're not a fintech company that is a very highly regulated industry. You're just a regular e-commerce business, but your investors and everyone is still worried about government regulatory actions, bans, and things like that. That shouldn't affect your company in the first place. So again, these are like personal experiences that I've had. Yeah.
So that's interesting. So just a few stats here. According to some research, $237 million was the cost of internet shutdowns in sub-Saharan Africa in 2020. And at least 26 out of 54 African countries have recorded at least one internet shutdown since 2007. So this is a pretty pervasive problem all around. Do we see that continuing? And how do we, what's the future look like? Samira, Oluyomi,
okay.
either of you two. Either of you two.
Okay, well, I really am an optimist at heart, but at the moment I don't see I don't see the current situation as being, oh yeah, at some point very soon we're going to see an end to this, because a lot of the people in power have been in power for a while in a number of countries. And I do want to acknowledge that there are many African countries where there has not been an internet block and things are going as they're going. But I would say that the end of internet being blocked or social media platforms being blocked or whatever is directly correlated with new powers coming in who are more supportive of freedom of speech and freedom of expression. And like when Twitter opened its offices in Ghana, and I know that Facebook were oh gosh, I wish I'd remembered this, but Facebook said something about wanting to build the undersea internet cable to connect countries in Africa, Europe, and the Middle East. Like, I think that there needs to be, an acknowledgement here that even with tech companies bringing more of themselves to the continent, I don't necessarily feel that will then lead to less repression on the social media front. Again, I feel like that's a really negative thing to say. And I think, as the years go by, hopefully we will see younger leaders come in, new leaders come in. But until that happens, I think that during challenging times, during elections, I think Zambia's got elections in August, next month. And if someone said to me, do you think they're going to put a block on the internet? I mean, I'm not a betting woman, but I don't, I think there's a good chance that they may.
Right. So it's about power and politics.
Yeah, I still think it's a tool for repression. I do still believe that.
So ultimately, it's about political reform. And what's interesting too is that because of the way the internet has developed, of course, the government can't always stop everything that's happening on the internet. So ultimately, it becomes something that backfires on them as well. So I wonder to what extent governments can control the media and social media in maintaining power. But before, we can dive into that for hours, but why don't we switch topics and let's talk about the cryptocurrency embargo in Africa, in Nigeria, I'm sorry. Mm-hmm. I'd love to hear from you, Leomi, on that, and then also from you, Samira.
Yeah. So basically, I guess you're asking about the ban on cryptocurrency in Nigeria.
Correct.
And some other African countries. I think one thing that government needs to realize, which is one of the things I keep telling people that I know in government, is that there are certain things that you cannot stop. And as of today, I think cryptocurrency is one of those things. Government has gone ahead to say, you know what, we're going to ban banks and financial institutions from processing transactions that are related to cryptocurrencies, which means that if you invest in cryptocurrencies, you can't move funds into your bank account from platforms like Binance, Coinbase, or any other platform that you use. You can't move funds, to and through your account into those platforms. But what we've seen is that is leading to while people were trying to figure out a way to move around that regulatory decision, new opportunities are being created. And that is what you're seeing with the P2P, the P2P growth in Africa. Nigeria still remains the biggest crypto market in Africa. And what we are now seeing is that P2P transactions are taking over, which means that people literally just buy crypto from each other. And virtually every platform used in this country have launched their own P2P segment, from Binance to Luno, Bitcoins, and the rest. And so, again, the government, they've not been able to actually ban it, but it does have effects, right? And which is the same thing that is happening with Twitter. They've done that to Twitter, but people are still using VPN, and more people are on Twitter today than they were before now. Before the ban, more people are now involved in cryptocurrency transactions and investments than they were before the ban.
Yeah, going back to my previous comment, I wonder to what extent some of these bans and restrictions actually push people or accelerate the move towards these tools even faster, right? Especially the example of the cryptocurrency in Nigeria. If it's being banned through the mainstream financial institutions, then people are going to go around it and go through the peer-to-peer, and maybe that's a good thing at the end of the day.
Yeah, well, it may be a good thing, but when you think about the optics, when you think about how the world will view Africa and most importantly the country involved, it's not a good thing. When at a point where Africa need growth, need to build wealth, need to open up opportunities for FDI, you practically making it important for technology companies to raise money because everyone is scared. Recently, the Nigerian government said, you know what, you cannot spend more than $100 from your Naira credit cards on a monthly basis. And you can't transfer more than $4,000 a month out of your domiciliary accounts. You can't transfer out of the country. Little regulatory decisions like that reduces the level of trust in an economy. And I mean, one of the things I tell people is when you walk into rooms and pitch your company, basically it's difficult to first raise certain amount of money locally. When you walk into rooms outside Africa to pitch your company to investors, and you get asked questions that you wouldn't have been asked if these regulatory actions, this ban, and all these lack of trust and the rest were not in place. How do you answer those questions? I tell people, being an entrepreneur is difficult enough. Having to fight regulatory decisions that are unpredictable makes it extremely difficult than it should be. Right? So we may say, there could be some positive side to it, but there is more negative side than the positive sides. And this is what myself and a couple of other entrepreneurs have continued to say to the government, openly, publicly, hoping that people will listen. But like Samira said, the hope that this is going to change is tied to a change of government, change of people who see things differently coming into power.
And before, I'd love to hear from you, Samira, but before that, I just wanted to ask folks in the audience, please, we would love to hear your views, as well as your questions for Samira and Oliomi. So please raise your hand if you'd like to join us on stage, and we'll call on you in order so we can hear from you as well. Okay, well, I'd love to hear a few comments from you, Samira, before we bring others on stage.
Well, I think, Oluyemi said everything really, because in my perspective as an outsider, when you hear something like what happened, with the central bank in Nigeria and crypto, straight away, I think what you interpret is the institutions in this country are not open to talks, to regulation, to something in the middle. The response is always blanket bans. And that will always make you feel a little bit reluctant in terms of, if it's that famous quote, if you see everything as a nail, if all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail or whatever. So I think that's a big part of it. Mm-hmm. And I remember reading a couple of months ago, that actually when, about 2 months, almost 2 months after the ban came into place, that there was a Bitcoin data provider which said that the usage of Bitcoin trading in Nigeria had actually gone up by 27% since that directive. So you are
Right.
right in that people are finding ways around it, but the point is they shouldn't have to.
Right.
And I think that when we discuss, you know, the impact of all this regulation on entrepreneurs, on investment, something that needs to be we need to bear in mind is, regardless of the impact it's having or not, this shouldn't be the case. It shouldn't be this difficult.
Indeed. So I worked in Haiti for 10 years, or I still do. And a lot of people will ask about the impact of the various disasters and the government instability and so on, and what Haiti needs to change. And my answer is always very simple. For business, we want stability and predictability. And if we don't have stability and predictability, then it's really hard to run a business, much less invest in one. So I think the governments of these countries aren't doing themselves a service at all by creating that instability in a very unnecessary way just to maintain power. Well, great. Thanks for that, Samira. Jeffrey, I'm sorry, hello, Yomi. Now over to Jeffrey, who just joined us on stage. Love to hear from you. May a short intro and your question or comment.
Hello, everyone. This has been a really, I would say, realistic conversation, because in most cases, we tend to gloss over the real issues that are happening on the African continent and talk about these high in the clouds ideas. But I'm glad that everyone has been really honest with what's happening on the continent. Thank you for inviting me up. My name is Geoffrey. I'm based in Kampala, Uganda. I run a startup called ChargeCo Technologies, and what we're doing is we're providing phone charging services to mobile phone users in public places who are, running out of battery. And I would like to say in Uganda, this is, I think, our second day. Actually, this is the first day of no OTT tax. So you all know that Uganda had an OTT tax introduced a few years ago, about 2018. And, there was a lot of pushback, but it stayed. It was 200 shillings per day and about 1,400 shillings per week. And, about the tier goes up higher and higher. And this was really prohibitive to internet access and social media access. But as of today, they've, scrapped the tax and introduced a new direct tax on data bundles. And what I think is the main reason why this has been introduced is because people had learned the art of using VPNs, and the tax wasn't performing as well as it should have. So they decided to introduce a direct tax on all data purchases of 12% excise duty on all data bundles. Now, moving on from that, I would like to say in Uganda still, one of the youngest countries, a lot of Ugandans use Twitter. And the fact that, it's been blocked on in Nigeria is actually, I wish Twitter was just blocked in Uganda instead of what's actually happening. So in Uganda, what's happening, they see you tweeting against the government about any issue, and they come and pick you up. They track you down, they find your offline footprint, they pick you up and torture you, or, do all kinds of things to you. A friend of mine was picked up yesterday, false identity, and he was beaten up really badly and returned a few hours later. He was only returned because his dad had some connections in the government and made a few calls, and then he was let go. But it wasn't even the right person. But trust me, these guys will try until they find you. I've personally witnessed gun-wielding, goons picking up people and beating them up, throwing them into vans, and that's it. So I think Africa still has a long way to go in terms of, freedom of speech, in terms of regulation. If governments go with the gun, if they can't regulate social media peacefully, by maybe putting certain caps or, curbing the free speech. So I think one of the best things that could ever happen to Africa is going blockchain. is going for maybe satellite solutions. Could be Elon Musk's Starlink that maybe has no direct interference from the government. But we definitely need to rethink how we connect to the internet and how we utilize all these solutions, because the more we work within the centralized system, it's very easy for the bad or wrongly intentioned leaders to pretty much stifle the development and the use of these services that do impact a lot of businesses and a lot of individuals in real life. Yes, that's all I have to say.
Thank you very much for that comment. So I hear decentralizing access or the control over the access to these services, as well as potentially decentralizing the financial system. Thank you for that, Jeffrey. Very chilling anecdotes you told that puts things in context. Over to, unless there's some comments from Samira or Oliomi, I'd like to head over to Helen, or hand it over to Helen.
Hello, everyone. Thank you very much for taking my comment and question. So my comment actually follows very well after Jocelyn, because I think it's clear that the environment where Twitter and things like that can be banned stifles people like Jocelyn who could really create brilliant things. So even though they're kind of succeeding and succeeding despite the obstacles, imagine what would happen if these obstacles weren't in place. So one thing that I kind of wonder about, and I would love to hear some feedback on, is why these internet shutdowns aren't taken more seriously and taken more as a human rights issue that people meaning like corporate entities and donor governments take more seriously. Like, I think these countries and the people in these countries are pretty much just left to fend for themselves, and you just wait until the internet comes back on. I've seen campaigns like keep it on, where they're just kind of, as they're trying to be a pressure group to reverse the shutdown, but I'm just not seeing any actual pressure point that actually works, and so just curious about any thoughts on that. Thank you.
Thanks for that question, Helen. Samira, Oliomi?
I guess I'll go first. That is a great question, Helen. Thank you. And it is the big question: where and how other governments, international community, almost pick and choose what they have a harder stance on and what they have a softer stance on. So if you take, for example, Chad had, I think, one of the longest internet bans. One of the longest. So they banned it for about 16 months from about 2018, I think it was. And there was a lot of, we condemn this, we call on the authorities to lift the ban, but nothing was actually done. And then you see, in terms of the political situation in the country over the last few months, and everyone had something to say about it, and the French were all up in arms. I think and this is very much just an opinion, I'm not sure this is right or wrong. I don't think that the international community as such yet, or if ever they will, recognize just how important a right access to the internet is. I don't think they place as much kind of importance on it as they should. And whether that's because they feel that they only have certain things that they can bargain over, so they'll pick and choose, and the internet is much lower down on that, or because it's something they take for granted, I don't know. But I believe that there is not that much of a sense of urgency around internet blocks, because they're possibly thinking of what they see as far greater oppressions. And I also think that they feel quite limited in terms of how much they can say or do. I think a bigger question is, every time the internet blocks are lifted, you see a lot of people tweeting telecom companies who they accuse of being complicit. So I think there's also a question around their role in these things alongside the international community.
Right. Very interesting. Thank you very much for that comment. Oh yes, William, please.
So I share the same opinion with Samira. I believe there is little the international community can do when it comes to things around internet business. Which one do you fight first? Even from outside Africa. Last year, we all knew what happened with NSAS. If you were like watching what was going on in Nigeria between October and November 2020, young Nigerians spent weeks protesting police brutality, and that is, and some of us even believe that drove government decision to ban Twitter because the entire protest started on Twitter, and young Nigerians raised money for the protests using cryptocurrency. When the government decided to say, you know what, we're gonna start blocking bank accounts of the people that were pushing these protests. So you begin to ask yourself, what is the role of the private companies in this? How the banks responded to the cryptocurrency ban, how the telecommunication companies responded to the Twitter ban, even though there was no court order or anything legal. It was just an instruction from an agency, from a government regulatory agency to say, you know what, shut down access to Twitter, shut down access to cryptocurrency to financial institutions. We didn't see any, court order or legal documents backing those decisions. So you begin to ask yourself, what really can the international organizations do when the private companies decide to play ball?
Thank you for that comment. That's interesting, and a complicated ecosystem. Over to you, Samuel. I'd love to hear from you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Jim, and Lindy. Thank you so much for the invite. This is really
good to see you, Sammy.
Yeah, yeah. Just a quick introduction. I am Sammy, and from Ghana, but now in Germany. Founder of Startup Lounge Africa, and we are building an online platform to basically allow SMEs and startups to connect, be visible, and at the same time also access resources to grow. Maybe I'll probably also want to ask this probably a question to Oluyemi. There's this concept I've also observed, which is more often than not, especially when it comes to like African government and regulations. And I'll give an example. It turns out that a lot of the time, the regulations or the policies come after the tech or whatever it is, the phenomenon that is existing. For example, blockchain, for example, has already entered into the market, and then people are using it. That is when it feels as if the regulation is too late, and then now tries to catch up with that kind of innovation that's going on. I'll give you an example in Ghana. Hopefully it's a less grim picture of what happens, but in Ghana I know there's just been a new kind of it was actually announced by SEC in Ghana that they are now going to try and regulate cryptocurrency, and they'll be having things around stakeholder engagements to understand how to actually regulate this as well. So what's your take on this particular kind of phenomenon as well? I'd love to hear from you.
For me, I think it's absolutely okay for government. One way or the other, we need regulatory agencies. I believe that the role of the regulatory agencies, part of it is to protect the customers, drive growth, drive innovation, and ensure that people innovate within frameworks that are not that are not dangerous to the people. But I would say that it's very difficult to start regulating an industry right from the beginning. GDPR didn't start the day social media started. It was after various experiences that some people woke up and said, you know what, we need to protect the users, we need to come up with data protection policies and things like that. I think where the problem starts is when the default mode for regulatory agencies is to ban, right? The default mode should never be to ban from day one. It should be to regulate, to understand this space, and to ensure that we can. I mean, look at what the SEC in Ghana is doing. It's not. We didn't wake up and say, you know what, we're going to ban cryptocurrency. It was a case of let's engage the various stakeholders and figure out how we are going to regulate this industry. Regulatory agencies, starting with industry from day one, more often than not, I see them as killing the babies even before the babies were born. So these things can happen later in the cycle of development, but the goal should never be to ban or stop. It should be the opposite instead. Samila, what do you think?
I'm in total agreement with you. I think you were just spot on there.
Thank you, Samuel, for that and for the responses. Over to you, Gabenga. Quick intro and your comment or question.
Hi, great to be on this platform. Thanks, Lodi, for the invite.
Yeah, good to see you, Bigger.
Yeah, I think I've learned a lot here also. But yeah, quick intro on me. Benga Fola Alade, co-founder and chief product officer at Henny Tech Solutions, which is a Ghanaian food tech company that specializes in dining internet services for restaurants in Accra. So I mean, I've been hearing a lot of talk about a lot of the issues external investors are having with Africa, and to be honest, I agree with a lot of it. Like it's terrible. It's killing the aspirations of the African youth, who are the ones that are starting a lot of new things. But I feel like it's not a problem that will be solved overnight. It's a problem that's been here for many years. And there have been various systems built on top of this problem. And I feel like a lot of the conscious effort that African entrepreneurs have to take is to develop themselves and develop their companies to a status where the Nigerian youth and the Nigerian Nigerian entrepreneurs are looked at in great light. And I feel like this will have an external influence on when investors want to look into the country or into the continent to invest, because then they see that there's a lot of potential on this part. But I feel like all hope is not lost in Africa at the end of the day, because I foresee a rise in a lot of digital internet services. So I, for one, before I started running Henny, used to run a online learning platform for bakers. It was called Baking Intelligence. And through this platform, we were just me, myself. It was actually a family business. I started with myself and my brother and my mom. And we started doing content creation for baking videos and selling it. Basically, we had created a site and we started selling it. And we had so much influence from different countries in Africa. So right now, Baking Intelligence, we've been running it for about 2 years, two and a half years now. We have about, last I checked, 47 different countries represented there. And it just goes to show that there are a lot of African countries that are willing to buy into internet services. So if a lot of African tech startups are looking to develop, or any external investors are looking to invest in Africa, then I feel like a good place to go will be companies that focus on internet services that can be sold off the internet, rather than having any relationship with hardware or any hardware infrastructure. So that was just my little 2 cents I wanted to give on this topic.
Thank you very much. Appreciate that. Well, moving on to Angus from Cairo. Angus, thanks for joining us. So a short intro and your comment or question, please.
Yeah, Jim, thank you very much for asking me on. It's very interesting listening to everybody because clearly the discussion is below the Sahara, which is absolutely fine. And one has to learn what's happening everywhere to understand the dynamics. But it's quite interesting because you've been talking about technology and telecoms and so on. But if I look back, my background's been investment banking in mature markets, then in emerging markets, and also an asset manager and private equity and long-term investment, but in different institutions. But I've been based in the region for a long time, Riyadh, Dubai, and now in Cairo for 13 years. And it's really interesting looking at the dynamic and listening to the others, and where it seems that the overall infrastructure is significantly behind other areas of the world. And I have to say, Northern Africa, if I look back over, say, 25 years, one can see that there have been a number of areas which are negative. I had expected, for example, a lot more interest in companies having IPOs, and that hasn't really happened. We've seen one or two, but not enough. And in fact, we've had quite a number of major companies who have unlisted and gone to different jurisdictions in Europe, particularly, and that diminishes liquidity in the markets. But the other positive is that technology has, I think, transformed entrepreneurship, certainly in North Africa, and it's provided knowledge, lessons, both good and bad, in terms of examples, idea generation. It's made connections. People are able to get advice. They get new clients. They can have more help with marketing. So I think that I'm hopeful that with a greater use of technology in terms of telecom infrastructure, if companies can go borderless, then there can be significant changes. I mean, only yesterday, a company in this region, Katopi, raised around $400 million, valuing the group at around $1 billion. So a real unicorn. I have to say I've got questions over the valuation, but that's the valuation
Don't we all?
had, absolutely. But it does show you there's interest, and that the classical route might be avoided because of the fact there's significant capital milling around the world. But I do think there needs to be greater discrimination. But the narrative tonight, which I have to say is relevant, but I do wonder whether one might be a little off track looking at just one element. But the region, the whole region of Africa, every country needs to have much, much better telecom infrastructure. And generally that would then help to maximize investment, job creation, and then economic growth to create, hopefully, a positive investment cycle. And I really hope more governments get the message. And I think you, Jim, and your colleagues, and Lundy perhaps too, and others, as well as myself in this region, can constantly lobby for positive changes to do the right thing so that people can get jobs and be hopeful for the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you for that. And just to reiterate your point, I think sounds like another future topic in terms of what is the government's role in encouraging entrepreneurship and investment, and in particular to one issue that you alluded to, which is the existence of exit markets and efficient financial markets even within the economies that we're talking about, versus having to move to the US or to Europe for the efficient financial resources. No, thank you very much for that comment, and thank you for joining us. And then we have one final commenter question from Ravi. Would you like to introduce yourself? And
hey, Jim. Hey, Jim.
Yes.
Hey, guys. Hey, everyone. So yeah, comments on this. I'm from Ethiopia. My name is Rabi. I have a co-working space in the capital Addis, and also I have a startup in electric mobility, and also some consulting. Yeah, I think we got in touch with some people in this group in LinkedIn.
I was going to say we should talk. We should talk about electric mobility. But anyway,
yeah,
go
Jim,
on.
I sent you a message. Okay, yeah, we'll talk. So regulations and investing in Africa. I mean, I can talk only for what I know, like Ethiopia. I don't know about the other African countries, but I don't know if you guys are hearing the news of technology news in Ethiopia. Safaricom has been like awarded with like 8.5 billion for 10 years deal, and we have a lot of companies like Orange, and the regulations are getting much improved here in Ethiopia, and we still have more like to see for the ease of doing business, for competition to thrive in the local ecosystem, but we still have much difficulties compared to, I guess, Kenya. Um, but most of the things here are mostly the infrastructure, the investment that's been done by the local private sectors, but the tech is still lacking behind because they don't feel like it's something that's valuable for the economy, even though tech is very scalable sector you can go into. Um, so I came back to my country in 2018. I was abroad um, in Hong Kong and also in US. So after coming here, I was very pissed about, like very angry about like the situation, the regulations. So I was very impatient. But the 3 years we saw in Ethiopia has been, I guess, there was a progress, right? It might not be fast progress because there's a lot of influencing it, like the country situation, like the politics and everything. But yeah, glad to be in this group though. Like we're seeing steady type of change, but we still have more to work on. Yeah. So Jim, yeah, I'll
Indeed.
text you on LinkedIn.
Thank you for that comment. And we're down to our last couple of minutes before we shut down. Famous last words, last thoughts from Samira and Oliomi.
Well, I guess, I'm kind of leaving the session feeling quite positive, because it's been really incredible to hear from people who have set up, entrepreneurs who have set up businesses and are saying, well, regardless of these challenges, we are still moving forward. And I think that's what it really comes down to, that yes, shutdowns and restrictions will limit people, but I don't think they can limit them to the extent that they are not going to go on to be successful. I don't see that happening. I think the determination and the skills that our entrepreneurs on the continent have, plus support from organizations outside of the continent, mean that things will still continue moving forward. It's just a case of governments choosing to be helpful rather than to hinder progress, which I think is a sticky point.
Indeed. Thank you very much. And thank you again, Samira, for joining this week's discussion. Oliomi.
Yeah, I mean, my final word is, when you look at the kind of success that is being created across Africa, the exit, the fundraising, the profitable companies that have been created, you realize that this is happening despite all these bans and anti-business regulation or action from governments. You begin to wonder if these bans and regulations were